The winter air bit like knives as London awoke to the gray dawn of January 1649. Smoke from thousands of chimneys curled lazily into a sky heavy with clouds, and the streets were lined with mud that had frozen overnight. Despite the cold, crowds were gathering, men, women, even children, drawn by a dreadful sense of history in the making. For today, a king would stand trial not on the battlefield but in Westminster Hall. Before the eyes of his own subjects, King Charles I walked with deliberate calm, his black hair tied neatly behind his head, his figure draped in dark, simple clothes that belied his royal status. At 30, he seemed both younger and older than his years, youth in his posture, age in the weight of his expression. Soldiers flanked him, pikes at the ready, the clink of their armor echoing against the stone. Inside Westminster Hall, the atmosphere was electric. The grand medieval space was transformed into a court unlike any England had ever seen. The high windows allowed cold light to fall on the long wooden tables, the judge's bench raised at the far end, and the gallery packed with murmuring spectators. The king's presence silenced them. He stepped onto the dais and faced his accusers with an expression that was not fear, but something more chilling: defiance. John Cook, a lean man in his 40s with a hawk-like face, stood as prosecutor. His voice rang through the hall as he listed the charges: treason, murder, tyranny. He claimed that the king had waged war against his own people and shed innocent blood. Charles did not bow his head. He refused even to enter a plea. To him, this was no court of law but a sham, a stage on which Parliament sought to destroy monarchy itself. The proceedings stretched on for days. Witnesses were brought, documents read, accusations repeated. The king stood silent through much of it, occasionally raising a hand to protest, reminding them that no earthly court could sit in judgment over a sovereign. Each protest was dismissed. Outside, the city buzzed with rumors. Some hoped the king might be spared, others demanded his death. Markets brimmed with anxious talk. Taverns were full of heated arguments. Fear stalked every alleyway, for to speak too boldly in favor of the king might bring a knock at one's door from soldiers in the night. On the final day of the trial, the sentence was pronounced. Charles was found guilty of treason against his own realm. The hall fell silent as the verdict was read, the only sound the scratching of quills as clerks recorded the words that would shake the world. The king did not flinch. He stood straight, his eyes scanning the faces before him, as if committing them to memory. That night, Charles prepared himself with almost ritual precision. He wrote letters to his children, forgave his enemies, prayed for strength. He asked for 2 shirts to be laid out for the morning so that he would not shiver from the cold, lest the crowd think him afraid. Dawn broke on January 30th, and a pale sun cast long shadows over Whitehall. The scaffold had been erected outside the banqueting house, draped in black. Soldiers lined the streets, keeping the crowd at bay. The king ascended the steps with calm dignity, his black cloak fluttering slightly in the wind. He addressed the few permitted to stand close enough to hear, declaring that he died a faithful man of the Church of England, and that he had always sought the liberty of his people. When he finished, he removed his cloak and knelt. The executioner, masked, stood behind him, axe in hand. The moment stretched unbearably long, the crowd holding its breath. Then the axe fell. A groan rose from the spectators. Some wept, some cheered, others simply stood stunned. The deed was done. But the story did not end there. Soldiers held aloft the severed head, declaring, "Behold the head of a traitor!" The gesture was meant to break royalist resolve, to warn all of England that the age of kings was over. Yet even as the blood steamed on the scaffold, some in the crowd dipped handkerchiefs in it, taking relics as if from a martyr. The first chapter of England's darkest experiment in justice had begun. The fortress loomed beneath a moonless sky, its stone walls absorbing the night like a sponge. A damp wind curled through the battlements, whispering of danger yet to come. Vlad stood on the ramparts, his dark hair unbound, lashes heavy with dew. The events of the last days had left him hollow yet alert. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind seemed like an omen. Below, the courtyard buzzed with tense preparation. Soldiers hammered stakes into the earth, their torches casting restless shadows on the walls. He could hear the dull rhythm of boots against cobblestone, a heartbeat of war echoing in the darkness. A trusted aide, a boy no older than 17, approached and bowed deeply. "My lord," he said, voice quivering. "The emissaries of the Ottoman camp have arrived. They wait in the hall." Vlad's jaw tightened. He had expected this visit. Tonight there would be no illusions of diplomacy, only threats veiled as offers. The hall was lit by no more than a dozen tallow candles, their light wavering across the long table. At the far end stood two men in elaborate turbans, their robes embroidered with gold thread. Their eyes followed Vlad as he entered, flanked by two guards. "Voivode," said the elder emissary with an oily smile. "Our Sultan offers you peace. Lay down your arms, pay tribute, and Wallachia will know prosperity." Vlad walked the length of the table without answering. He could hear the shuffle of boots behind him, feel the eyes of his men. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost soft. "Peace," he repeated, tasting the word like poison. "You speak of peace while your armies build fires on our borders. Do you take me for a fool?" The younger emissary bristled. "Refuse, and you will be crushed beneath the might of the empire." Vlad stopped in front of him. Candlelight carved his features into harsh planes, his eyes glittering. "Tell your sultan," he said, each word deliberate, "that I am not his vassal. If he seeks tribute, he will find it buried with his dead." The emissaries stiffened. For a moment, the hall was silent except for the hiss of burning tallow. Then Vlad turned on his heel and strode out, leaving them standing like statues. That night he walked alone through the fortress grounds. He saw peasants huddled around fires, faces pale with fear. He saw his soldiers sharpening blades, muttering prayers, and he felt the weight of every life pressing on his shoulders. Sleep did not come. Near dawn, a messenger arrived with grim news. A detachment of enemy scouts had been captured at the edge of the forest. They were dragged before Vlad, mud-streaked and trembling. He questioned them himself. Their words confirmed his worst fears. An invasion was imminent, the army already marching. By evening, Vlad had made his decision. He would send a message so dreadful that it would freeze the blood of the invaders before they crossed the river. At dawn, the fortress awoke to the sound of hammering and shouting. Stakes were raised along the hilltop outside the walls, tall as trees. The captured scouts were bound and made to kneel in the cold morning light. Vlad stood among them, cloak whipping in the wind. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried to every corner of the hill. "Let them see what awaits those who bring war to Wallachia," he said. What followed was grim, slow, and deliberate. No screams echoed, only the rustle of banners and the murmur of horrified witnesses. By midday, the hill had become a forest of warning, the scouts suspended like grotesque heralds. When the work was done, Vlad climbed the ramparts once more. From there, he could see the river glinting in the distance, and beyond it the smoke of enemy campfires. He knew they would see the stakes soon. He knew fear would take root. As the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky blood red, Vlad allowed himself a single, quiet breath. The war had not yet begun, but tonight it would be the Ottomans who lay awake in terror. Dawn broke over the plains like a blade, slicing the night into shards of pale gold. Across the river, the Ottoman camp was stirring. Tents flapped in the wind, the smell of smoke and horse sweat thick in the air. Then the first cries rang out. A group of riders galloped toward the camp, shouting, faces drained of color. Behind them, the horizon bristled with dark silhouettes. The forest of stakes had been spotted. Within minutes, the entire camp was in motion. Soldiers and officers swarmed to the riverbank to see for themselves. The sight that greeted them froze even the most seasoned warriors. The stakes loomed like a macabre forest, the bodies of the captured scouts impaled in grim silence, arms dangling, faces twisted in their last breath. No one spoke. The wind carried the creak of wood and the distant caw of crows. It felt as though death itself watched them from the hilltop. In the command tent, the Ottoman general paced like a trapped wolf. His lieutenants whispered, their voices tight with fear. Some urged immediate attack to wash away the insult. Others begged for retreat, warning that such a man as Vlad was not to be underestimated. By nightfall, unease had spread through the entire camp. Horses refused to settle. Men jumped at shadows. Fires burned too brightly, as if to drive away the terror crouching in the dark. Meanwhile, Vlad moved like a phantom through his fortress. He checked the battlements, spoke with his captains, and issued orders with cold precision. Every torch was placed with purpose, every watchman instructed. He was preparing not just for battle, but for psychological war. Just before midnight, a storm broke. Rain lashed the walls, lightning lit the sky, and the fortress seemed to roar. At the Ottoman camp, the storm turned fear into panic. The forest of stakes gleamed wet in the lightning flashes, appearing to sway like specters. Soldiers claimed to hear whispers, voices calling from the hill. By morning, desertions had begun. Men slipping away into the trees, too terrified to face what lay ahead. When the rain cleared, the enemy found the stakes still standing, glistening like wet bones. The sight sapped their courage. Rumors spread like fire, that Vlad was in league with demons, that he drank the blood of his enemies, that the land itself would rise against invaders. Vlad watched all of this from his ramparts, silent and grim. Fear was the weapon he had chosen, and it was working. But he knew the battle was far from over. Fear alone would not stop an army forever. The next move would have to be even bolder. The morning air was thick with fog, curling over the river like a ghostly veil. Vlad surveyed the battlefield from his ramparts. The stakes had done their work. Ottoman scouts were gone. Deserters scattered reports of terror. But the main army was still formidable. He could see the glint of armor, the faint line of banners across the river, a river that now seemed to separate life from death. He descended into the courtyard, where soldiers adjusted pikes and crossbows, faces pale but determined. Among them was Mihai, a young captain of 22 whose hands trembled despite years of training. Vlad caught his eye, offering a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement that courage was demanded not from all, but from the few who could command it. The first shots came from across the river, arrows raining, splashing into the wet ground with a metallic hiss. Vlad signaled his men. The crossbowmen replied, sending bolts in a deadly arc that fell among the enemy. But Vlad knew this was just the opening, a test of resolve rather than true combat. In the heart of the fortress, Vlad moved with measured steps, speaking in hushed tones to his lieutenants. Fear is our ally. Let them believe the dead watch over this land. Every arrow, every clash, let it remind them that they trespass on cursed ground. The Ottoman general, visible through the morning mist, barked orders, desperate to maintain discipline. But panic had taken root. His men flinched at every shadow, every whistle of wind, imagining the stakes rising from the mist to snatch them. By noon, a skirmish erupted at the riverbank. Vlad's men held their ground, moving in a practiced rhythm that spoke of meticulous preparation. Spears and shields formed a wall, forcing the Ottomans to hesitate, their confidence eroded by tales of Vlad's cruelty, amplified by the previous day's horrors. The first clash of swords rang out like a bell, brief but fierce. Soldiers fell, and cries of pain and fury mixed with the river's rushing waters. Vlad watched from a slight rise, eyes sharp, calculating each movement. Every retreat, every advance, every faltering step by his enemies fed into his larger strategy, to instill a psychological dominion before physical conquest. The fog thickened as evening approached. From the high towers, Vlad ordered fires lit in precise locations, illuminating patches of the battlefield while leaving others shrouded in darkness. Shadows leaped across the river, figures appearing and vanishing, creating illusions of greater numbers. Whispers of the dead walk spread among the enemy ranks. Night fell, bringing with it lightning and distant thunder. The riverbank became a chaotic scene of splintered wood, discarded armor, and the occasional cry of a surviving soldier. Vlad allowed his men to rest but remained vigilant, walking among them, observing, ensuring discipline and focus. The Ottomans, however, were left to wonder where the line between reality and terror ended. By midnight, Vlad returned to the ramparts. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the enemy camp in disarray. Fires burned unevenly, and patrols moved hesitantly, almost expecting the stakes to rise again. A low wind carried the scent of wet earth, smoke, and fear, a heady perfume of victory. Vlad allowed himself a moment to breathe. This first clash was only the beginning, but it had succeeded in sending a clear message. Wallachia's defenders were not merely soldiers. They were a force that manipulated fear as effectively as steel. And he, their dark commander, remained untouchable in the minds of those who dared cross his lands. The dawn was crimson, as though the sky itself had bled overnight. Vlad's scouts reported movements along the forest edges, Ottoman forces regrouping, attempting to probe the defenses again. Vlad stood atop the northern tower, cloak soaked in dew, eyes scanning each glimmer of movement. He had expected this. "Prepare the traps," he ordered, voice low but cutting. Soldiers moved like shadows, checking hidden pits, tripwires, and sharpened stakes concealed among the brush. Every element of the terrain had been manipulated to favor Wallachia's defenders. The first wave of attackers appeared mid-morning. Mounted units advanced, confidence in their step, unaware that each footfall was being watched. Vlad's men remained hidden, almost statuesque, blending with the fortifications. The air smelled of wet earth and anticipation. As the Ottomans approached, Vlad signaled. From hidden battlements, a volley of arrows rained upon them. Panic spread rapidly. Horses reared, soldiers fell, and the illusion of numbers was reinforced by strategically lit fires behind the Wallachian lines. Mist and smoke blended, giving the impression of phantoms rising from the earth. Vlad moved among his men, checking the ranks. Mihai, the young captain, struggled to maintain composure, witnessing the chaos unfold. Vlad's gaze met his, a silent reminder that discipline and cunning were as lethal as steel. The Ottomans attempted to flank the fortress, but the terrain had been carefully prepared. Hidden pits and narrow defiles funneled them into kill zones where spears and crossbows could operate at maximum efficiency. Every sound of struggle amplified fear. Screams echoed unnaturally across the fog-laden hills. By noon, the battle intensified. Close combat erupted near the riverbank, men clashing with swords and shields, dust and mud mixing with blood. Vlad remained largely in command, his presence a constant, unyielding figure. He gave orders with precision, ensuring that every move, every counter, reinforced the perception of an omnipresent force. Vlad knew psychological warfare was key. Rumors of his brutality, amplified by stakes, phantoms, and carefully spread tales, ensured that enemy soldiers hesitated, glanced nervously at every shadow, and questioned their own courage. Even victories were carefully staged to terrorize, captured soldiers displayed for others to see, not as trophies, but as a statement. Defiance invited unimaginable consequences. The afternoon brought the turning point. A small detachment of Ottoman cavalry attempted a direct assault on the eastern gate. Vlad's men feigned retreat, luring them into a trap. Hidden spikes and pits tore apart the formation. Arrows and spears struck from concealed positions. Chaos became a weapon in itself. By evening, the remaining Ottoman forces were scattered, many surrendering or fleeing. Vlad's strategy had succeeded. He had inflicted maximum fear while conserving his own strength. The fortress remained untouched, the stakes and traps having done much of the work. As night fell, Vlad walked along the battlements, surveying the aftermath. Fires dotted the forest and riverbank, smoke curling into the sky. Soldiers whispered of seeing ghostly forms among the stakes, shapes moving in ways impossible for the living. Vlad's face remained calm, a mask of control, yet his mind already calculated the next moves. In the command tent, lieutenants and captains gathered around maps and reports. Each victory was analyzed, each error noted. Vlad spoke sparingly, his words carrying authority that needed no embellishment. Discipline, fear, and cunning. These were the tools he wielded with unmatched skill. By midnight, silence returned to the fortress. The sounds of battle were replaced with the distant croak of frogs and the whisper of the river. Yet even in this calm, the psychological imprint on the Ottoman survivors was permanent. Stories would spread far and wide. Tales of stakes, traps, and unyielding walls. A legacy of fear that would precede every Wallachian soldier. Vlad allowed himself a moment of reflection. This was not mere victory. It was the demonstration of a philosophy. Control fear, shape perception, and no enemy could stand against you. The day had been hard, the methods ruthless, but in the eyes of his people he remained a protector, a commander, and a symbol of unassailable power. The morning after the battle was eerily silent. Vlad walked among the wounded, his expression unreadable, eyes scanning faces for signs of dissent or despair. Survivors whispered rumors of stakes, pits, and phantom defenders. Fear lingered like a thick fog over the landscape, mingling with the scent of damp earth and smoke. Captives were gathered in a clearing near the eastern gate. Vlad's men restrained them with precision, careful not to show excessive cruelty, yet ensuring the prisoners understood their utter helplessness. The purpose was psychological, fear as a weapon to reach beyond the battlefield. Among the captives, a young Ottoman lieutenant trembled, realizing his fate might be more symbolic than immediate. He had not fought particularly bravely, but survival now depended on interpreting Vlad's methods correctly. Vlad approached silently, the lieutenant's eyes widening. His presence alone commanded attention. Discipline, menace, and control radiated from every movement. In the fort's shadowed halls, Vlad convened with his advisors. Each report of prisoner behavior, rumors of enemy panic was analyzed meticulously. Orders were issued to spread word of the traps, the phantom warriors, and stakes lined along every vulnerable approach. It was not enough to win battles. The enemy's perception of Wallachia as invincible and merciless had to be permanent. By mid-afternoon, word of captured soldiers' treatment reached nearby villages. Vlad's men ensured that these accounts emphasized subtle terror, restraints, cold stares, whispered warnings, the eerie quiet of empty cages. No explicit bloodshed, but the psychological effect was devastating. Fear worked silently, insinuating itself into every corner of enemy territory. Meanwhile, Vlad inspected fortifications along the northern wall. He noted the strategic placement of sentries, their vigilance essential to maintain the impression that Wallachia's defenses were endless and omnipresent. Soldiers trained tirelessly not merely to fight but to reinforce the aura of invincibility. Every glance, every stance, every silent patrol contributed to the legend. That evening, a contingent of spies returned with intelligence. Ottoman reinforcements planned another attack at dawn. Vlad's response was measured but decisive. Traps were reinforced, decoys placed, and the scouts' reports coordinated to exaggerate enemy numbers. Every move was part of a broader narrative, to manipulate fear and expectation as effectively as any weapon. In the quiet of the command tent, Vlad allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The war had shifted from physical combat to psychological domination. The captives, the rumors, and the perception of omnipresent vigilance were as effective as any sword or arrow. Vlad's philosophy was clear. The mind could be wounded as easily as the body, and the terror of anticipation often surpassed the horror of actual violence. Night descended with heavy clouds. Fires dotted the perimeter, casting long, flickering shadows. Vlad's men moved silently, maintaining the delicate balance between visibility and concealment. Any sign of panic or disorganization could undermine the carefully constructed narrative. Fear was a living instrument, and Vlad conducted it with precision. In the distance, villagers whispered of phantom warriors on stakes and spectral figures patrolling the walls. Some swore they saw Vlad himself walking unseen paths, watching, waiting. By the next dawn, the Ottomans hesitated. Their morale faltered before a single arrow was loosed. Vlad had won again, not by slaughter alone, but by creating an environment where the enemy's own mind became their prison. At dawn, the first horns of the Ottoman advance echoed across the valleys. Vlad, standing atop the northern wall, observed the horizon with calm intensity. The enemy forces spread in ordered ranks, unaware that the landscape had been meticulously prepared to instill terror even before they reached the fortress. The defenders moved like clockwork. Stakes and traps, subtly disguised among rocks and trees, awaited the invaders. Vlad's presence was a symbol of control. His soldiers, disciplined and precise, acted as extensions of his will. Each step and maneuver a demonstration of authority. The air was taut with anticipation, each breath heavy with tension. As the Ottoman cavalry approached, rumors of phantom warriors and impaled men had already begun to circulate among their ranks. Vlad had ensured these stories reached every contingent. The psychological battle had begun even before the first arrow was fired. Fear gnawed at the edges of courage, creating hesitation where boldness might have prevailed. Vlad's scouts reported enemy formations, and he adjusted his defenses with calm calculation. Archers were repositioned, signal fires placed strategically, and reserves held just out of sight. Every detail contributed to the illusion of invincible preparedness, designed to fracture morale. The first clash was swift and brutal. However, Vlad's forces struck not merely to kill, but to maximize the enemy's perception of relentless, omnipresent danger. Arrows rained down from concealed positions. Spears and pikes appeared from unexpected angles. The Ottomans recoiled, confusion rippling through their ranks as they struggled to distinguish real threats from phantom ones. Amid the chaos, captives who had survived previous skirmishes were displayed strategically. Their restrained movements, pale faces, and silent despair served as living symbols of what awaited any who dared defy Wallachia. Vlad observed carefully, noting the psychological impact of each arrangement. His cruelty was methodical, almost surgical in its precision. By midday, the enemy's advance had slowed to a halt. Panic began to ripple through the lines. Soldiers questioned their own senses, fearing traps and specters. Vlad's reputation as the Impaler, combined with careful manipulation of the battlefield, had achieved a near-complete psychological victory without unnecessary slaughter. In the command tent, Vlad reviewed the battlefield with his advisors. Reports of hesitation and desertion from enemy units arrived constantly. He issued orders for a controlled counterattack, designed to exploit confusion and amplify terror. The elite cavalry, hidden until now, struck swiftly, slicing through faltering enemy formations. yet always maintaining the image of an unstoppable, calculating force. As dusk fell, the battlefield bore silent testimony to Vlad's strategic mastery. Few Ottoman soldiers survived the day, and those who did carried with them stories of unseen forces, stakes, and traps. The memory of the day's terror would linger far beyond the actual casualties. Vlad moved through his fortress after the battle, inspecting fortifications and assessing his men. Their discipline, bravery, and silent obedience reflected the culture of fear and respect he had cultivated. Every patrol, every sentry, every whispered warning reinforced the legend of the iron-willed ruler who commanded both life and death. Night brought an uneasy quiet. Fires along the walls flickered in the wind, shadows dancing like silent observers. Vlad knew that his work was never truly complete. Fear had to be maintained as a continuous instrument of power. The Ottomans might retreat, regroup, or strike again, but each return would meet the same unyielding, meticulously prepared strategy designed to dominate both body and mind. The final winter of the campaign arrived with biting winds and a pallid sun that barely pierced the clouds. Vlad, seasoned by countless battles and betrayals, knew that the ultimate test of his resolve was at hand. Reports reached him that a coalition of neighboring forces, emboldened by previous skirmishes, had gathered to strike decisively. He moved through the fortress with measured steps, inspecting defenses and issuing orders with quiet authority. Every trap, every stake, every soldier's position had been meticulously arranged. The fortress was more than stone and wood. It was a manifestation of Vlad's strategy, discipline, and psychological mastery. The walls themselves seemed to carry the weight of fear he had cultivated. The coalition approached at dawn. Unlike previous incursions, these forces brought siege engines, banners waving with confidence, and ranks filled with hardened warriors. Yet, the sight of Vlad on the walls, calm, armored, and unflinching, immediately unsettled even the most battle-hardened among them. Rumors of stakes, phantom defenders, and merciless reprisals had reached them, planting seeds of hesitation and doubt. The first assault was met with precision. Archers and crossbowmen, hidden behind crenellations and trenches, released volleys at calculated intervals, striking fear as much as flesh. Vlad's infantry, poised and disciplined, engaged only when optimal, ensuring that every clash magnified terror and confusion. Each movement was a demonstration of control, turning panic into a weapon. Among the chaos, Vlad's personal interventions became legendary. He appeared at critical points, assessing, directing, and occasionally confronting enemy commanders personally. His gaze, cold and unwavering, unnerved those who sought to challenge him. Every command reinforced the perception of an omnipresent, inescapable power. Despite the coalition's numbers, hesitation and fear fragmented their ranks. Desertions occurred and units collided in confusion. Vlad's use of psychological warfare, impaled figures, hidden traps, and silent observing soldiers, proved decisive. The battle was won not merely by skill or strength, but by a mastery of terror that undermined morale before it could manifest as resistance. As night fell, the aftermath was evident. The battlefield was littered with signs of retreating forces, scattered equipment, and abandoned banners. Vlad walked among his soldiers, inspecting the fortifications and assessing survivors. He spoke little, allowing the silence to underscore his authority. Every man and woman in his command understood the gravity of their victory and the price of disobedience. In private, Vlad reflected on the cost of his campaigns. He had wielded fear as a tool, cruelty as a strategy, and discipline as a weapon. Yet he understood that his reputation would endure beyond the immediate victories. Tales of his ruthlessness, cunning, and unwavering will would echo in the minds of allies and enemies alike. He had transformed the battlefield into a theater of psychological mastery, where victory was as much about perception as reality. Beyond the immediate aftermath, Vlad considered the legacy he was forging. Fortresses strengthened, borders secured, and enemies vanquished were only part of it. The greater achievement was the cultivation of an unassailable aura of power, an enduring deterrent that would ensure obedience and respect for generations. The cold winds of winter carried whispers of his deeds across villages and cities. Stories of the Impaler, of the strategist who commanded fear and respect, spread beyond borders. Vlad knew that history would remember not just his victories, but the methodical, disciplined way in which he had achieved them. His legend was cemented not through sheer force alone, but through an unrelenting combination of strategy, psychology, and indomitable will. As he gazed toward the distant horizon, Vlad understood that the final confrontation was more than a battle. It was a testament to the power of intellect, fear, and unwavering resolve. And though he would face future challenges, the world had already witnessed the culmination of his mastery, an empire shaped as much by the mind as by the sword.